Thank you and good afternoon. Welcome to the Board of County Commissioners workshop, land use workshop for Wednesday, January 13th, 2021. And please be advised that this is a hybrid meeting. For those of you watching, that's what we are doing now. And I'd like to have a roll call first for attendance purposes. We do not need a quorum in person at this meeting.
Good afternoon. Kemp?
Here.
Cohen?
Here.
Overman?
Here.
Smith?
Here.
White?
Here.
Hagan?
Here.
Myers?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our Planning Commission Director, Melissa Zernita.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to have this workshop this afternoon as a follow-up to the workshop that we conducted on December 8th regarding a number of plan amendments that are responsive to the board's direction on requesting land use studies for the RP2 land use category and for the Wimauma area to update their community plan and to make recommendations regarding the Wimauma Village Residential 2 land use category. As requested at the workshop, we have invited WTL, Tom Lavash, and Tom Moriarty to give an overview of their land use market study and community character profile for the Wimauma area. So we will start off the agenda with that item, and then Marianne Abrahamson and Tatiana Gonzalez will lead you through presentations on the RP2 and the Wimauma Village 2, particularly honing in on areas where we need some direction from the board in terms of moving forward with making modifications to the recommended plan amendments and land development code amendments. Also on the line are our consultant team who helped us throughout the way. So all of us are here to answer questions throughout the presentation. With that, I will turn it over to Tom and Tom from WTL.
Great, thank you, Melissa. And Commissioners, we are very honored to be here today. My name is Tom Lavash from WTL Plus A, and my very long time colleague, Tom Moriarty from Retail and Development Strategies. And I think, Tatiana, we're going to have you share your screen. It would appear that we were having challenges several minutes ago trying to share my screen. So what we'd like to do is walk through, really focused on the policy recommendations as well as the market potentials for the two studies that we have prepared. And while Tatiana's pulling that up, over the past year, actually, we have prepared two studies, the first of which is as Melissa noted, the Wimauma community character profile that is really focused on revitalization opportunities in the 5 or so sub areas that comprise Wimauma Village. And the second study is or was a real estate market analysis of development potentials in both the WVR2 and the RP2 zones or areas.
Tom, I think you need to tell Tatiana to advance one slide each time.
Yeah, I don't see anything.
Okay.
It says Tatiana's starting to share content.
Yeah, I can see it, Tom, so it is up.
Ah, okay, so I'm not seeing it. Okay, so on the first slide, Tatiana, yeah, just under key objectives, if that's the one you're on.
We're on the second slide only.
Okay, okay.
Madam Chair, this is Commissioner White. I think we need to give the presenter a moment to be able to see the slides to help with his presentation.
Sure, we could hold off a minute and
Mr. Lavash, if you can see the HTV program screen, user, that should, I believe, have the slides up currently.
Bear with me here. Might be easier if I just go into my own PowerPoint.
Yes, that would be fine too.
Yeah, why don't we move on? I'm in my PowerPoint, and on the slide under key objectives, the first one, as we noted, the two studies, and really particularly the market analysis of WVR2 and RP2 was focused on what we would cast as the drivers of demand for growth, and we looked in great detail at demographic conditions, demographic trends, looked at forecasts, and all of the metrics that we would define as driving demand for real estate on the ground, including population and household growth, what households spend on retail, job growth, which is a critical barometer of demand for what we would define as workplace real estate, office space, industrial space, retail centers, and the like. At the same time that we were looking at that, we also looked in great detail at real estate market conditions on the ground, inventory, new construction, net absorption, which is a critical measure of what is demand for real estate by users, all sorts of other metrics. And that served as the basis of evaluating market potentials for a range of uses, including residential, supporting services such as retail, and of course, importantly, workplace demand for office and light industrial space. Next slide. Thank you, Tatiana. And really, all of that analysis and detailed research effort is really focused on guiding public policy decisions and really forming a market basis for updates to policies, specifically as it pertains to the employment and service requirements in WVR2, the issue of wetland density credits, retail and supply issues, and performance ratios, a whole host of policies that have been in the comp plan, and in, the analysis, of course, intended to help guide those directions moving forward. Next slide, if we could. I think we want to be very clear that the entire analysis, the two reports, do not suggest any change in either previously approved or partially implemented PDs, planned developments. They do not propose to stop growth or new development in South County. We'd also want to be clear that they do not incorporate the impacts of the pandemic. I think that's nearly impossible to do. And the analysis is through year-end 2019. What they do, however, is really intended to inform the staff and consultants' work on their land use studies, provide guidance on the inconsistencies in those policies, and we'll get into those in the recommendations. And of course, address the issue of balancing. And this is a critical message here of balancing development in the rural service area. Next slide. And I think here's, in terms of the first recommendation, clearly illustrates that the analysis came to the conclusion that there is an imbalance between market demand and the existing entitlements in South County. For example, in WVR2, you have 3 approved PDs that will allow the development of close to 2,400 units. There are another 3 applications that would that are applying for another 1,000+ units that staff, as we understand, is recommending denial. And then there are close to 5,000 acres of developable land remaining in WVR2, and we'll illustrate what impacts that may mean. In RP2, for example, there are approved developments for 1,355 units and another 1,900 or so developable acres remaining. And of course, that's net of the recent or October sale of the AgMart site, about 800 acres. Next slide. Here's an illustration of where in WVR2, where those parcels are located. And the darker mustard color are the 3 approved developments that would allow close to 2,400 units. The lighter mustard or yellow color are existing PDs that have not yet built out. So there is additional unit counts in each of those PDs that could be delivered. And then the brown color are 3 parcels that are pending, where staff is recommending denial. And those 3 parcels comprise another 520 or so acres that would be the 1,000+ units. Next slide. This is an illustration of where that developable land inside of WVR2 is located, this greenish color plus the brownish color. And we would also note, interestingly enough, outside of WVR2, there's another close to 2,200 acres of remaining developable land. Next slide. So part of our analysis looked at what have housing starts been over the past 20 years or so. And it was interesting that in WVR2, this over the past 20 years, the 20-year average has been sustained at about 80 units a year of housing starts. This is actual county data on housing starts. But notably, particularly over the last 3 years, the amount of new residential development in WVR2 has really ramped up and is averaging about 275 units a year over the past 3 years. And we've considered both of those metrics in an analysis that you'll see in a minute. In RP2, the pace of residential development is lower, but is on a parallel track. Past 20 years, averaging about 45 units a year, but over the past 3 years is averaging over 200 units of housing starts annually. Next slide. And this is the analysis that we would like to show, where we considered that there are 4,900+ acres of remaining developable land. This is in WVR2. Now moving from left to right on this table, and at an estimated allowable density of 2 units an acre, that would allow over this 4,900 acres about 9,400 units that could be developed. If those units are developed at the high point, that is over the last 3 years where starts have averaged 275 units a year, it would take about 34 years to develop that 4,900 units or that 4,900 acres or that 9,367 units. As economists, real estate economists, we always want to consider multiple economic cycles so that if the pace of development moving forward into the future is not at its high point, not at 275, but it is at its sustained historic trend of 80 units an acre, you could see that would take well over 100 years to develop the 4,900 units that are developable in WVR2. And so what that suggests to us as real estate market analysts is that this does not justify rezoning or increasing the allowable densities in those areas, particularly in the RSA, that are not planned to accommodate more units per acre. Next slide. Pardon me. In RP2, there are about 1,950 acres remaining developable. This is a slide from the planning consultant's work. The pink area shows the Baum Village plan area, and the yellow area shows the proposed North Village plan area. And the purple hatch line is the Baum community plan area. Next slide. And a similar analysis in RP2 of those 1,950 acres would suggest that those could be developed to accommodate about 3,900 units. And at the recent historic pace, the past 3 years, 207 units a year, it would suggest about 19 years to build out. However, at the long-term historic pace of 45 units or starts a year, it would suggest over 80 years. And similar to WVR2, it would be our position that you do not, this does not justify rezoning or increasing those allowable densities. Next slide. Tom, do you want to start on 2?
Yes, thank you. Recommendation number 2 addresses a current condition in the policy under which as of right allowed residential densities are calculated based on gross acres to units. And one of the things we heard about initially in the stakeholder interviews early in the process and from others was that this has had an unanticipated result in which a parcel that includes an unusable wetland area allows transferring that unbuildable density onto the remainder of the parcel. This has increased densities beyond what many people saw as the intended lower density. And it's also resulted, based on some what stakeholders told us, in adjacencies to farmland and suburban densities, in some cases as much as 4 to 5 units per acre, and 40-foot lot subdivision layouts immediately adjacent across the back fence to farmland. And that this seems to have resulted in much greater densities in certain concentration areas than folks anticipated. So our recommendation is that the policy be modified to change it from units per gross acre to units per net developable acre. That should address that kind of imbalance that has occurred in areas where the substantial wetland portion shifted density within the parcel boundaries. Next slide. One of the other things that came up in discussions with planning commissioners and residents was the idea of using TDRs, or transfers of development rights, to shift density around in the RSA. And in fact, Hillsborough County does have a transfer of development rights program. It's been on the books for a number of years, but it's only recently come under greater scrutiny and has not had much applicability up until very recently. Nationally, TDRs have proven to be a useful tool to conserve farmland and agricultural land, but people may not always realize that establishing an area for conservation and a TDR results in a permanent and perpetual easement on that land. It is a permanent change that's not subject to land use policy. It is a property right that's foregone as part of the process. The economics of TDRs suggest that a 1-to-1 value of taking a TDR unit from one place and transferring it to another has not proven to be in other locations enough of a financial incentive to bother with it. And most of the other examples outside Hillsborough County suggest a minimum of 2 units credit from every unit transferred to make it worthwhile. Those are sometimes measured in residential units, sometimes in floor area ratio or FAR measures, or others. But the precedents are not yet established well enough in Hillsborough County to know how this would work. It's just we're offering this as a suggestion based on what we've seen elsewhere. The other element that has been missing is dedicated staff and ongoing funding for a TDR program. And the reality is that administration and enforcement of that transfer is a pretty substantial job. There's a lot involved in the administration of it. Next slide. Another element is to clearly establish both the locations and the allowed policies, development policies in sending zones, the areas from which density is being transferred, and the location and policies surrounding receiving zones where that density gets shifted. This is a complicated calculation. The base values may be very different, hence resulting in that 1-to-2 or greater ratio of transferring in to make it more valuable economically. Density increases can work, but it does affect infrastructure spending and commitments. This has been an issue in South County where the RSA, which does not have the infrastructure network that the urban services area does, there is a trade-off involved in that in both directions. And the agricultural land values in South County could increase if they are transferred into the USA. So there are some financial dynamics at work here involving sending, receiving credits, and valuation. So the solution to this, if you really are serious about doing this, it can work, but it's going to, we're suggesting that you would need to fund and establish dedicated staff and create a manageable, commercially viable TDR program. Next slide.
One of the policies is related to the persons per household, and I believe it's 2.7 persons per household in the employment and service requirements element of the comp plan. And through the course of the market analysis, we realized that there are any number of ranges of people per household. For example, in 2010, the county's persons per household number in South County was 3.66. In 2019, it had declined to 3.44. In the 3 census tracts that comprise portions of both WVR2 and RP2, the census, the American Community Survey, estimates that household size is 3.20. And another source, a private demographic source, Esri Business Analyst, suggests that in Wimauma Village itself, household size is 4.21, and in Baum it's slightly smaller at 3.77. And we would note that the 4.21 in Wimauma Village is really illustrative of diverse areas with significant migrant populations that tend to have larger household sizes. I think the message here is that the recommendation is to determine and adopt a consistent persons per household number for those elements in the employment and service requirements. And we would also note that we used a range of these household size numbers in our demand analysis for housing potentials. Next slide. Tom?
So I'm here. So the next aspect of recommendation number 4 looks at reducing the requirement currently on the books of 10 square feet of retail space per resident in these planning areas. That was intended originally, as we understand it, to address adding supply of more retail and consumer services as planned developments occurred in South County. In many cases, those have not yet been implemented. And in part, that is because the number is, while well-intentioned, we think, is beyond what the market will support. Based on average industry patterns, spending patterns, and consumer patterns, and these are broad industry averages, not Hillsborough County specific, a new resident supports somewhere between 4 and 7 square feet of retail, including groceries. Employees support somewhere between 2 and 5 square feet of retail. This is in addition to what they might spend as a resident if they're working close by. And visitors tend to spend, in Florida, support somewhere between 1/2 and 1.5 square feet of retail per person, except in the Orlando market where everything is on a whole other scale, at least until COVID. These ratios suggest and support the fact that the goal of 10 square feet per person is not easily reachable. And there are other ways to address that. Next slide. We also wanted to use some guidelines and review them for commercial employment ratios. And those ratios are rapidly changing. The notion that one job is created for every 500 square feet of commercial and retail development is not accurate. It's a sort of broad guideline, and the table shown on the right here illustrates the differences in the number of employees per square feet by retail categories. And they vary very much depending on the nature of the kind of business, but you can see the range goes from 60 square feet 60 square feet per employee for fine dining, very high level of service, up to 2,500 square feet for a hardware and building materials store, where just the nature of the inventory and the nature of the business model doesn't have that many employees per square foot. This has been complicated by the growth of online retail and improved distribution systems and networks, which has allowed traditional store sizes and depths to shrink because people don't have to keep their inventory on hand for a whole season. They can order it and have it there in 3 to 5 days. This has also led in states like Florida to the over-entitlement based on general market patterns of retail space without necessarily considering demonstrated market support and resulting in oversupply. that is parallel with the considerable shifts in the retail industry nationwide that has resulted from COVID and the rapid growth of online sales, which had been increasing annually anyway. But in our work in Florida, Tom and I found that many municipalities will accept an entitlement request from PD developers without really checking to see if there's enough sufficient market support, that it doesn't just result in a transfer of one area to another, but not net new growth. So this all underscores the complexity of having a kind of one-size-fits-all approach to this sort of ratio. Next slide. The same principle applies to changes in the office employment ratio, or the numbers of employees per square feet or multiple square feet, which also vary. There is currently nationwide no single widely accepted occupancy factor in measuring how many employees there are per office space. A general rule of thumb has been, as you see in the first bullet, that one job is created for every 250 square feet of office development, or vice versa, that every 250 square feet would include one employee. But we've also found that shifting, and as you see at the table at the bottom, in the late 1990s, because of open plan office networking and partition office spaces, it dropped to 175 square feet according to Reese, and then to 125 square feet, that's a cubicle, in the early 2000s. According to CoStar, which is the sort of national benchmark for real estate reporting, in 2010, they were recording 197 square feet, and in 2017, 182 square feet. Those are both quite different than the 250 square foot rule of thumb. So that's something that's going to require a closer look as you're using your calculus for determining how many employees result from office-based entitlements. Next slide. We found in the course of research in Hillsborough County documents, a 2005 economic development study completed by county staff that had a pretty dramatic illustration of the difference in return on public investment, whether it was a net cost or benefit. And in that 2005 study, which I would caution you is now 15 years old, it's showing that at that point in time, the cost for services exceeded the taxes generated for residential by a deficit of 29 cents per dollar spent, or for taxes generated and services provided. I'm sorry. All of the others were positive, and what jumped out at us, given the discussion with stakeholders about the loss of agricultural lands, in large part contributed by changes in federal policy that had shifted the strawberry market south and other food products that were traditional major contributors, agricultural contributors in South County. Agriculture was generating a profit of 25 cents per dollar of taxes generated. So we recognize that these numbers are not current. We don't know what the current returns are, but we think given the number of unmet entitlements and the transition of agricultural lands for a variety of reasons, it would be very worthwhile to have the county redo this study just to get a snapshot of where you are. This looked like a very valid and solid report to us, but it's outdated and it needs to be updated and conducted on a comprehensive basis. Next slide. Pardon me. We also wanted to focus on the market implications of some of the planning ideas that have been discussed. And the two incorporated in this recommendation are that, in fact, there is the opportunity on a manageable and limited basis to create a civic and commercial town center in Wimauma Village, and to develop and create an infill housing strategy for both Wimauma and Balm in the RP2 area. Pardon me, I'm sorry. Right now, the development patterns that are emerging because of the way entitlements have been granted and issues like the stormwater shift in density within a parcel have resulted in some sort of scattered development patterns and remaining vacant lots that have gotten in the way of creating critical mass, particularly for commercial activity and for development of better infrastructure. These kind of clustering policies that you've had on the books for a while, we think also should consider underdeveloped locations in addition to just redevelopment of raw land. And particularly in the case of Wimauma Village, where due to ownership patterns and other things, there are less and more dense areas, but there's not a central heart or civic destination that we think ought to be a result of this plan as it's implemented. Next slide. We know this will dovetail. These are market-driven conclusions. We know this will dovetail into the planning consultant studies that you'll see in a few minutes. But we wanted to wrap this up and summarize the recommendations we're making based on markets in 5 sub-areas that have been previously designated. Those are shown on the map. And if you can go to the next slide, sub-area 1 is light industrial and office. We wanted to incentivize agribusiness prospects there. Sub-area 2 is Wimauma Town Center District. That's a place to further cluster and incentivize small and local retail and food service and make it walkable to residents, because a number of Wimauma Village residents don't necessarily have cars and are not mobile. And they're also undersupplied in some selected consumer services, professional services, and training facilities. Sub-area 3 is the Wimauma Downtown District. And this area, although designated as the downtown, is largely dominated by the 80+ acres owned by the Church of God, which may not necessarily be a parallel traditional downtown use. So we think there needs to be an effort made to cooperate with them and think about how the church wants to use its holdings and whether or not that makes sense to continue designating it as a downtown district. Sub-area 4 is the West Lake District. This is moving over toward Walmart and US 301, and we think the likely planning outcome of this will be further pad site developments, and because of the presence of national credit tenants, the introduction of additional national retail and commercial occupants there. And then sub-area 5 is the West End, and this includes Walmart and other major national retailers, and we would see this area evolving, continuing to evolve as it already is, anticipating more automobile-oriented commercial uses typical of this kind of corridor. Next slide.
Thank you, Tom. I tried to find a sign that said every party has a pooper. That's why you invited the real estate market analyst, but I couldn't find one. So here's the next best thing. Next slide. This summarizes, based on the findings and the analysis in the market study, land use potentials over the next 8 or 10 years, 5 years for retail. In terms of understanding market potentials for office and general industrial, for those workplace uses that we traditionally go to work to, what we did was take a fair share analysis of the number of new jobs that is forecast throughout Hillsborough County. DEO, the Department of Economic Opportunity, is forecasting that Hillsborough County will add 59,500 new jobs over the next 8 years, so through 2027. And today, of course, both Wimauma and BOCC comprise a very small slice of the employment base in Hillsborough County, less than 1% each. And if both Wimauma and BOCC were to maintain that fair share, that would suggest only about 135 new jobs would be allocated to Wimauma and BOCC over the next 8 years from that pie of 59,500 that DEO is forecasting. I think the message there is that reinforces the importance of economic development strategies that are focused on both business retention and recruitment, particularly in Wimauma Village, as a means of enhancing job prospects for local residents. And based on that fair share analysis, you can see in this illustration that would suggest a fairly limited amount of workplace real estate in the range of about 10,000 square feet for office and maybe 15 to 25,000 square feet for general industrial, which should be focused in that sub-area 1, the Wimauma Light Industrial and Office District at the far east end of 674. As we noted earlier, we examined market potentials for housing using a range of household size from the lowest to the highest and considered various growth rates for a 10-year forecast period. And for example, in one of the scenarios, we took the highest growth rate in Wimauma in WVR2, which was 3.91% per year. And we projected that out for 10 years. So that considers the recent uptick in growth over the last 3 years. And as real estate economists, we always want to look at a broad window in terms of forecasting to consider multiple economic cycles. We don't want to rely solely on the past 3 years where there has been an uptick. But what that suggests is that support for roughly 800 to 1,700 housing units, which we would note is below what has already been approved in those 3 PDs and at least in WVR2. And retail uses are really tied to, as Tom noted, the issue of oversupply and the challenges that the retail industry is facing currently and expected over the near term, particularly as recovery from COVID starts to take place. But that's tied to rooftop growth as well. And it would suggest in the range of 35 to 45,000 square feet. And that ought to be clustered and focused, as Tom noted, in the sub areas on particular types of retail, such as food service, farm to table sorts of things. Next slide. And this is simply a wrap up of the points that we've endeavored to make in the presentation regarding policies, reconciling the imbalance between market demand and entitlements, modifying the as of right densities, the issue of the TDR program, adopting a consistent persons per household number, and other metrics as they inform the employment and service requirements in the comp plan, updating the cost benefit study that the County Economic Development had previously undertaken, and of course the focus on housing infill and creation of a town center for the village. And with that, we'll turn it over to questions. And we do have supplemental tables that are much more, slides that are much more detailed, should there be specific questions.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It was excellent.
A lot to digest.
Yeah, it's a lot to digest, but it's one of the, I have to tell you, I've been a county commissioner for 4 years, and it is the most sophisticated, thorough, and presentation I've seen, and one that I've really been hungry for to get this kind of information. So I really appreciate it. But I will move to other commissioners. We have lots of hands up here. So the first hand I saw was Commissioner White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to confirm that this is the end of all presentations. We're just in board member discussion now. Is that correct?
No, I do not think so. We have several other presentations, but this is just about this study.
I tell you what, I'm going to put my hand down, Madam Chair, but I'd like to request that I be recognized first at the end of all the presentations.
Okay, I will make sure that I do that.
Thank you.
Sure. Commissioner Overman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. And thank you, gentlemen, for your report. It's The Economist in me was like reading, like, oh my gosh, this is candy in a store where everything's free.
You didn't fall asleep.
No, I did not at all. But I also been wearing my, I've been taking some blinders off when it comes to equity. And something that I noticed in your analysis, and this is not just your analysis, so it's not a criticism of the report at all. It's our paradigm on how we measure how to build communities. And in the slide that talked about the policy recommendation number 4, and we'll go back to that, it talked about the retail categories and how much space we could possibly anticipate given the number of acreage we have and what the capacity could be. And the items that were listed were generally retail in nature. And in a community like the WRV2, where it's a relatively low income historically agricultural based community that is seeing a pretty significant displacement in its surrounding area due to home prices being well outside of the reach of the people who work there. I think that we need to also take into consider other elements of a thriving economy when considering the job element. So, for example, what we've learned in this year, separate from COVID, but as a very important fallout of COVID, was how critically important daycare and other community support services that aren't considered retail. Without having a thriving daycare or a thriving school or a thriving community center, or any social services support, a community has a very difficult time doing all the things it needs to do in its life. It's very, when we it kind of is the root to the fact that there's an assumption that a 2.3 or 3.7% household is a husband and wife and a kid, or husband and wife and two kids, when in reality there's a single breadwinner oftentimes with multiple children in this community. And that requires a different level of economic opportunity, not only for employment, but also in terms of retail or other economic development efforts to support the needs of the people that live in a community that may be moving from what has been historically rural or agricultural to more of a suburban or an urban type of community. So without recognizing that mix of other businesses that support a household or a community and not including them in the numbers, we are definitely limiting what we not only look for economic development, but count when it comes to densities that are considered or building styles. Because what we've heard is, we do need affordable housing in this area. Yeah, we don't want poverty pockets, but we need affordable housing for the people who live in this area. And they also need jobs. And they need economic mobility. And they need access to get to those jobs, or they don't have transportation. So I think in our analysis on how we work through not only the next steps of the community plans, of the comprehensive planning, those elements of measurement also need to be included. And I don't know if it's possible to incorporate those factors, because that might help us get to the median ground that we seem to be wrestling with. How do we have the development tied to the jobs element of, for example, or the downtown area associated with how Wimauma as a community grows? And when we haven't made it required to be adjacent to the downtown area, we create suburban car-centric communities that don't benefit the downtown area.
Yeah.
So if we include those other business entities as part of that economic mix, we may get closer to meeting that jobs square footage FAR ratio that we're looking to try and accomplish. Secondarily, so that was something I wanted to see if there's a way to track that data and way to be incorporated here to see if that impacts the jobs, household size calculations. And then secondarily, I have been jumping up and down about TDRs for a long time. So I want to thank you very much for helping give us some framework of the metrics that have worked in other areas. Because I've always thought we have to have clearly identified in our comprehensive plan receiving zones and sending zones. We have to have defined tranches of time if it isn't for perpetuity, which it sounds like those that have been successful have been in perpetuity. And we do need to get a good understanding of what the county's responsibility would be to manage that program. And I about every 3 months I go, Kyle, where is this? Where is this? but I think it is an important element that if we are, and it is a great tool. It needs to happen not only for our development areas or urban areas or suburban areas, but really to help support and protect our agricultural communities and their families and their businesses. So we have to have the financial mechanisms that match up with the lending mechanisms that make sense, recognizing how the agriculture community operates. So I thank you very much for your report, but I do think we need to really sort of reframe the bias we have about economic development and what a community needs to thrive. And there's some real social service related or community related businesses that are critical to a community that are not evident in your report. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will recognize Commissioner Smith.
Were the consultants going to respond about specific businesses like that or services? Did they have an answer?
Yeah, if I may, Commissioner, thank you for that opportunity. This is Tom Lavash. Commissioner Overman, your points are all very, very valid, and those are metrics that in a traditional real estate market analysis and consistent with the scope of work that the county defined for us, those were not in. We did not look at affordable housing. We did not look at the issue of daycare, but those are metrics that are critical. And we would suggest, if we could, that be something that the county undertake as part of community character plans and profiles moving forward. Thank you, Commissioner Smith.
Thanks. Am I recognized now?
Sure you are.
All right, thanks. I cannot tell you how happy I am with this report. Also, as Commissioner Kemp said, I've only been a commissioner for 2 years, but I've been a citizen involved for many years. And this has to be the best consultant report I've seen ever. In terms of thoroughness, in clarity, in frankness, in, tell us the facts and what it really means, and getting to the heart of the matter. And so I just think we're so fortunate to have this current study of these critical areas right now, to inform us as we move forward from these moratoriums back into business as usual, that I really hope all of this information this report is used to inform what finally comes back to us in our proposals for changing our comp plan and land development code. However, I fear that so far the proposals do not seem to incorporate these recommendations to the extent that they could. And let me just ask that quickly of the consultants. I have a couple other questions, but do you see that any of the proposals so far actually contradict what the study is recommending? Do you see places specifically that we should improve what these recommendations are that we're about to hold public hearings on?
Thank you, Commissioner, for the question. We have just commenced our work in a series of optional tasks that the county clustered after the completion of the market study. And so we're evaluating the planning consultants' work as we speak. And we haven't, in fact, we had, Tom, what was it, 8 or 10 documents that we've just begun to plow through. So I'm not avoiding the question, but we have just started that analysis.
That's great, and I just really want to ensure that the Melissa, that the comp plan recommendations that come to us come with the advice and recommendations of these consultants, and hopefully incorporate as much of their recommendations as possible. I couldn't agree more that we need a market analysis. I wish that could be sooner than later, given the fact that we've already rezoned so much land that it's more than the market indicates we should actually develop at 2 per acre. And I'm really, I'm really glad to see this analysis of how much land is left in this rural area undeveloped. And what we're talking about is back of the napkin, WVR2 plus RP2 is 7,000 acres at 2 per acre. That's 14,000 houses. And that's about, that would be just on what's left, not counting what we've already done, which was thousands more. I mean, you're talking about almost doubling a city the size of Temple Terrace, double, outside Baum and Wimauma, if we allow that whole area to develop at 2 per acre. So, you know, I hope everybody gets from this report the sense of scope, because like we were talking about just recently, we're at our land use hearing, we're always presented with these little bits, one at a time, you know, 1,000 houses here, 800 houses here, and boom, as Commissioner Cohen said, eating the elephant one bite at a time. You wake up one day and you ate an elephant. That was a great metaphor. So, you know, the last thing I'll ask you about is, well, 2 things. The goals of the original Wimauma plan jobs element was to support. It was the kinds of things, we just got a letter from the Wimauma Now group, right? And they were talking about this jobs element versus the community benefits list. And there's been talk about substituting the community benefits and tossing out the jobs element, but that mostly comes from the stakeholders who are largely or who include a lot of land use attorneys whose market is out here, and that's what they specialize in is developing rural area into urban densities. So those are, I want to make sure everybody understands, that's not a group of residents of Wimauma, that's a group of stakeholders. And so it's broad perspectives on some of whom benefit or profit by some things more than others. So the idea that we should substitute the community benefits list in some way, they were saying, well, you know, maybe, but they could support that, but they'd want it to support the very goals that the jobs requirement was designed to support. Namely, you know, the reason that the original Wimauma citizens put that in their plan, and I was there when they did, I participated in that plan, was so that they would not develop a bunch of subdivisions full of commuters in that rural area who simply drive through their town to their jobs and services in Tampa every day, but so that development as it occurred would be a part of their community, contribute to their community, be integrated with their community, and live and work in and work in the town center. And so that's why they insisted that the jobs and services be in the town center of Wimauma concurrently with the residents and houses that grow as they grow outside the town center. So I want to ask the consultants to confirm. To me, it sounds like you're not talking about throwing out this commercial jobs requirement and substituting some other list of, community benefits, but you're recommending refining that so that it more accurately serves that goal and possibly getting into even a more complex analysis of what kinds of jobs and possibly, like Commissioner Overman suggested, what kinds of services are appropriate and how many square feet they require as the residential is developed. Is that true?
Commissioner, if I may, that's correct. We're not saying there should be no requirement of provisions. I want to go back to something Tom Lavash said, however, that this study and most real estate studies.
I'm sorry, I think we missed part of that sentence. You froze for a minute.
Oh, I'm sorry. We did not recommend that this be thrown out altogether. We said that the square footage, the employee counts were too high. I think it's very difficult to mandate a direct nexus from one land use to another because of the way real estate is financed and the way developers function. It's unusual to find a housing developer that can also develop office. It's unusual to find an office developer that understands and gets retail. And we heard from a number of the developers in South County that they've struggled to meet the retail goals because they couldn't get the retailers to take the space. They didn't see enough market density. It was too fragmented and diffuse. So it's hard to structure and mandate a direct nexus of an if then this. I think the other thing that should be mentioned, because you're absolutely right, there is a critical need for affordable housing. The resident population in Wimauma Village in particular is low income and has a lower job skills level, and they deserve a chance to move up, and they need better facilities. That, however, is not a commercial enterprise. That's a public policy enterprise that can be done in joint venture partnerships or public-private partnerships or leveraging public policy in other ways. But the market won't respond to that first because it's not the most profitable. That's not the way our system works. So I think it's one thing to recognize the need and another to really think through how can we implement these changes in a way that we can leverage some private investment, but it's not going to be led by that group. It's just not the highest and best use from a financial return side. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing to do. It just means it's a different kind of animal. The other thing that occurred to us frequently as we worked through this, because we were focused solely on the Wimauma Village and RP2 areas, was the sort of larger pattern in Hillsborough County, where you're one of the fastest growing areas in the country. Florida is a state whose economy is driven by tourism and residential growth largely, other than the major cities. And you've got some of that, but you also have this interesting and loaded with implications potentially separation of an urban services area and a rural services area. And it seemed to us that using these two study areas that we were charged to look at as a case study, it seemed like the lines of who was providing what had gotten a little blurred. So, for example, when you look at the cost of entitlement, our sense is that cost ought to be fully loaded to include the cost of infrastructure that developers are required to put in. And if they haven't put it in up front, then it may not happen right away or may not happen at all. It should not be fragmented out in the hope that eventually the public sector will catch up. That's not good public financial policy. It's great for real estate investment, but it's not so great for use of public funding. So the larger question for us was, Hillsborough County is a large area. And these two sub areas that we focused on are a subset of a much larger question about countywide growth, where that growth should be directed and allowed, to the extent to which growth is allowed outside the urban services area, and at what cost, and what's the relative cost to put it inside the urban services area if you're going to be serious about having these two kinds of areas. There seemed to be a lot of kind of gray area interpretation that was not wholly one or the other, but had also not, I shouldn't say, I was going to say it may not have paid off in the way you thought. I don't think we'll know that until you look on that update of the cost benefit analysis to know what's been the real effect. But we have an awful lot of entitlements floating out there that may or may not have all their incumbent costs carrying with them, and that needs to be verified from our point of view. Tom, you want to add anything?
No, thank you, Tom. I think that conveys clear messages.
Boy, does it ever convey clear messages. You are spot on, and that's why we need that further housing market analysis, economic analysis. I worry though that as soon as we lift this moratorium, we're going to be deluged with applications for rezoning before that can be completed. So it's important to put as much teeth in the coming recommended comp plan amendments that we can, foreseeing as much as we can, estimating as much as we can, understanding that nothing is carved in stone. If the market study later shows we should adjust in one way or another, we can adjust. But we have to today do the best we can with what we can see coming. And one idea might be to, given that, like you said, the housing developers aren't the best, can't provide the retail and jobs and services that we're trying to ensure are there concurrently with housing. That they keep saying they can't do that. But the point of it was so that we don't do too much housing before there are jobs in services in the town center. Otherwise, we create those commuter subdivisions of people just leaving and not being integrated. And we draw people to Wimauma subdivisions rather than providing for the citizens of Wimauma as it grows. So one idea, I think, in closing, might be to use some of this market study to in our upcoming comp plan amendments to put in some policies of timing residential growth based on need, which is like 30 to 100 years from now for anymore, but based on need and commercial and services development in the town center. It was never really meant for developers to provide the jobs. It was meant to ensure that they didn't provide too much housing in the rural area. This county, if you all will recall the housing bubble of 2008, where things got overheated, particularly in East and South Hillsborough, we had huge ghost towns here. We were the subject of national news stories about the ghost towns that were here, leaving the CDDs and homeowners associations holding the bag when we had allowed development to get beyond the market need of what was really here then. So we certainly don't want to make that same mistake in Wimauma and Baum. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'll try not to be as long, but this has so many elements to it. And I would agree with the comments made before. And it is so spot on and so compelling and so full of information. for just to highlight a few things that I think are important too, are that may not be fully understood, is kind of the differences between Wimauma and BOM. And one was just the average salaries. Wimauma, $36,900 a year. Hillsborough County, $82,000. And BOM, $99,400. So we're talking about very, very different kinds of places. And there is, as you pointed out, a real desire, and I think it was perfect for Wimauma to have a town center, which, and again, I think you pointed out well, we need to deal with this. One, the difference is, as you stated, about the developers that are out there are ones that just want to have open farmland to put down single family housing unendingly. That's what they do. That's what they, that is what they do. They don't build town centers. They don't, we have to somehow figure out how to make that happen. As you said, as long as it's, and this is just a very practical matter, as long as the town center is owned by all the land is owned by the Church of God that isn't interested in, having anything done that we know of. I mean, I think it will take probably county staff or what, I'm not sure what we do, as you suggested, move the town center. I think maybe some of that's been done, but that is another practical consideration. I find all the time that you said dreams and reality. It doesn't seem like we focus that much on reality. And that's what you've done. You've given us, we need to do this fiscal part of this. The other part that, just to emphasize again, is where you said that we never knew, and I've been wanting to know this forever. The entitlements, these are for everyone. Entitlements that are already out there that the builders could build on tomorrow if they wanted to, and just what they have already available to them is what you've shown would be 10 years. Take 10 years to use what they've already got. So why are we rezoning for more density when we're crashing in terms of infrastructure? The fact that we've already approved more development in these areas than the market can bear in a decade. We shouldn't be rezoning for more, and we shouldn't be changing our planning policies to increase the allowable densities. And Commissioner Smith, that the timing, the job requirement spoke to timing, and the timing maybe not being there, and looking at, maybe changing that somewhat, but that is a good timing element for how we move forward with development here. And finally, I was very fascinated. Well, first of all, I've already presented, or we're going to move forward on removing the wetland density credits. Hopefully we will move forward. We have that before the board at this time. The wetland density credits in the rural area that I've never thought made any sense at all in so many ways. I won't go into it here. But as well, I know there's been great interest in the TDR. I was never even informed, I don't think, that Hillsborough County already had a TDR program. And I didn't really understand or know it, but I read about yours, and I went online and started reading about other TDRs, and particularly in Maryland that you referred to. But, and I actually looked at Lee County and some other Florida counties that seem to be having, seem to do it. They create a program that can work. And I know that you have some recommendations on there on how to do it. And so I think, again, we really need to look at that. But I'm wondering about that and what you put out. I don't know how all this goes together. That, somehow we have to, that's a more than I can, obviously, I can't put it together, but you all do. I'm sure you can figure it out. But the farm trusts and protecting our rural as well as our farming community, or our farming, our agricultural lands, and what we can do about doing that and preserving that in maybe some kind of, as you farmland trust, as you pointed out. Vacant land, we make 95 cents an acre. That's a 15-year-old study that we get off that. Most people consider vacant land, oh, just develop it and we'll make more money. No, we lose money on so much of it when we do develop it, as you've pointed out. The agriculture, the same thing, as you pointed out, they pay more in their taxes than we use in that land. So I think we need to think about that. Whereas back in that older study, every acre we developed for housing was a 26% loss through the taxing structure. So I think that kind of economic underlay has been really obvious. And the final thing I'll say is there's been in Hillsborough County, and it's way worse from what I can tell from any other high growth county in Florida and anywhere else, we have paid near zero for impact fees. And that's just the basic impact fees. We're not talking about the tax base or anything. We have paid near zero for 3 decades in so many areas: fire, mobility, roads, in our parks, zero. I mean, we have been water and wastewater, and all of those costs have been instead in schools. Those costs have been shifted into the general tax base, into sales taxes, into all kinds of other things. Raising rates, customer rates for water and wastewater has been a subsidy to the new development, and it just shouldn't be that way. We are working at correcting that now, but it's not there. It still has a ways to go. And in many cases, our impact fees, which were originally done in 85 or 87, hadn't been raised in 35 years. And were, I think if you saw any comparison to what we have done and given away in infrastructure, I think I conservatively estimated over the last decade, and it's a very conservative estimate, I believe, is about $1 billion in money that was very reasonable to pick up that we lost because we weren't charging impact fees. But it strikes me too that a lot of the suggestions or things put forward in this are not things that can be done necessarily through the Land Development Code. Has limitations as a tool. And as I think you said, it's like, we have to, at county expense, but to good ends, bring in the affordable housing and figure that out, as well as the economic development pieces. They're not things that land policy can dictate. So, but they can help to get a framework, and then we as a county make a commitment outside of that. But there's a lot of things in what we will see coming up, I think, that suggests somehow that that's something that developers could do or provide or fund, and it's just not the case. So anyway, with that, I will let us, I don't know if you want to comment on any of that, but I know it's just all thrown out there, but.
Well, one other comment I want to make is we are not against growth. We just want that growth to be well planned and to be financially justified from a public standpoint. And you have another situation in Florida where you have different counties with different dynamics. So if you look to your south, their restrictions, their impact fees, their everything else, they're eager for growth that could in fact take away. You're competing for economic development, and I understand that. But that throws another wrench into the machine of where do you position yourself and at what cost.
That's a great point. And also we always hear that they want great schools, and communities want transits and sense of place and a quality of life. And those are things that we're not doing, to my estimation, well, and sometimes by national measures of our counterparts well. And that those are things that also bring in the kind of the economic development, which we certainly do want. And I'm not against growth either, but I just want fiscally responsible growth and growth that helps us become a better, more prosperous place. And I don't think we're quite on the path there at this point. So I guess we'll go to the next presentation at this. Thank you so much for being with us. I don't know if you're going to stay for the other parts, but thank you so much for your presentation and for your report. And I will be just going through it like 5 more times and learning from it. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. We very much appreciate the opportunity to assist.
Thank you.
Now we'll move to the next agenda item, which is related to RP2, and Marianne Abrahamson with the Planning Commission staff will walk you through the presentation, which has a lot of options, which we're interested in your feedback on throughout the discussion and dialogue. Thank you.
Marianne, you are muted, just so you know.
There you go. That should help. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
We can see the, yep, now we have the good one.
Perfect. All right. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Marianne Abrahamson, Planning Commission staff. I'm here to present on the Residential Plan 2 or RP2 land use study. As a quick reminder, the draft documents linked in your packet for this item are the same drafts as the public and the board saw in December. The feedback received by you today will inform the next revision of the draft documents ahead of the public hearings. As has been referenced, a workshop was held with you back in December in which we received comments on the proposed policy recommendations to date. From those comments, we've identified core topics, and we have worked with a consultant team in addition to county staff to propose various options to address the comments and hopefully satisfy concerns. The intent of this workshop is for the board to consider the proposed options and to provide further feedback for us to refine the policy changes. The purpose of the RP2 study is to evaluate and recommend changes to current RP2 policies and regulations while balancing rural character, the need for efficient development and infrastructure, and existing entitlements and property rights. Here we have the study area. The area in pink is the land which is currently subject to the moratorium. Just as a reminder, the yellow and pink areas are all designated RP2 outside of the urban service area, and are both subject to the same regulations today. One of the recommendations is to identify the area in yellow as the North Village Plan area and the area in pink as the Baum Village Plan area in order to best align this area with the vision of the Baum Community Plan, which is represented by the purple dashed line. As mentioned at the start of the presentation, after the December workshop with the board, we've identified overarching topics which we are requesting additional feedback on. These include density bonuses, transportation and infrastructure, including the issue of design exceptions, the commercial component, and open space. Other items which were discussed include the wetland density bonus, TDRs, and community benefit triggers. We're continuing to work on these items, but we recognize that they're also being addressed by other means, and so we therefore will not be presenting policy options on those today. However, of course, you're welcome to speak on these issues if you wish. Here is the proposed density structure, which was presented during the December workshop. For the North Village Plan area, this would allow for 2 dwelling units at 5 acres or greater with community benefits, 3 dwelling units per acre with additional community benefits, and 4 dwelling units per acre with TDRs. In the Baum Village, the density is proposed at 1 dwelling unit per acre, or excuse me, 1 dwelling unit per 5 acre, up to 160 acres, and the potential for 2 dwelling units per acre at 160 acres or greater with community benefits. We heard concerns from the board about allowing densities greater than 2 dwelling units per acre. This would apply to the North Village Plan area. So in response, an option we're proposing today is to keep the North Village Plan area at 2 dwelling units per acre until a mobility or infrastructure plan is in place, and or to increase the minimum acreage in the North Village Plan area from 5 acres to 50 acres with an aggregate component and cap the density at 2 dwelling units per acre. Oh, excuse me, let me go back. There we go. Another comment we heard was an interest in exploring a sliding scale for BOM properties under 160 acres. An option to address this would be to remove the aggregate component in BOM in favor of a sliding scale. For our second topic, we looked at transportation and infrastructure. The adopted policy states that the county will not be planning for infrastructure in this area. As presented in the December workshop, the proposed code calls for us to shift to that approach by requiring interconnected streets and sidewalk connections and to look at a multimodal approach to transportation planning in RP2. This is partly addressed in various community benefit options. In December, the board indicated that it would be ideal for the recommended mobility plan to be in place prior to the adoption of the CPA and LDC amendments, and to expand a mobility plan to consider other infrastructure needs such as utilities, fire, parks, and schools. Given the timeline and scope of this study, an option to address this concern would be to hold density allowances at 2 dwelling units per acre until such a plan is adopted. Another comment received that was in line with what we've been hearing is the need for infrastructure to be in place prior to development. An option to address this would be to strengthen language in the community benefits table that would support that. We felt it appropriate to include this topic here, given the concerns we've heard from both the public and the board regarding permitting of design exceptions. So while meeting with county staff on this issue, an option discussed to address this concern is to strengthen the requirement that substandard roads be brought up to safe standards by the developer. Our third topic is the commercial component. Again, as presented in December, the adopted policies require on-site commercial development. And as we've just heard in the presentation from WTLNA, the recently conducted market analysis suggests that existing commercial exceeds what the market can support based on households in the area. So the proposed code therefore does not call for new developments to require on-site commercial. However, it is encouraged and is included in the community benefits as an option. The intent is to place less of an emphasis on commercial within neighborhoods, which the market analysis has shown to present challenges, and instead to concentrate the commercial in nodes. The yellow circles here indicate where village centers, including such commercial nodes, are encouraged. Feedback from the board during the December workshop indicated an interest in maintaining some degree of on-site commercial requirements. An option to address this feedback is to require non-residential uses, which could include the daycare uses that we heard expressed by Commissioner Overman in this previous presentation. So we could include or require, excuse me, such uses at a certain development acreage threshold. Another comment received spoke to how the distance from commercial is evaluated. The preference was to evaluate this based on the road network rather than as the crow flies or a buffer. Options to address this include requiring commercial if the new development is beyond a certain distance from existing or approved commercial development, and to measure that distance by road network or actual travel distance. Our fourth and final topic is open space. As a reminder about the information presented in December, adopted policies determine open space based on the clustering ratio and remaining land. The proposed policies encourage preservation of open space, requires contiguous open space to be a minimum of 40% of gross acreage, and includes various options for what constitutes open space, including low-intensity agricultural uses, passive recreation, stormwater, and buffers up to a certain percentage of the requirements. Additionally, a community benefit option includes working with county staff to dedicate a minimum of 10% of the site for ELAP or the Environmental Lands Acquisition and Protection Program. Feedback received from the board on this issue include dedicating open space to the HOA, The option for this is rather straightforward in that we can add policy language for open space dedication to the HOA. Another comment received was regarding the establishment of a conservation easement to preserve on-site open space. There is no option presented here for that because our proposed policies do include the provision for establishing open space as a conservation easement. The board also expressed interest for the policies to encourage coordination with ELAP and wildlife corridors. Again, the option here is quite straightforward and suggests that we can add policy language mandating open space coordination on parcels that abut existing ELAP land and wildlife corridors. But whether or not the land in question would ultimately be eligible for ELAP would be at the county staff and the board's discretion. So here's our proposed schedule moving forward. We plan to move into public hearings in February and the adoption hearing in March ahead of the moratorium deadline in May. And here's a look again at the items I just presented and which we would appreciate the board's feedback on today. Thank you for your time, and we're available to answer any questions you may have.
Did we want to take questions at this time or go through the presentation? I see Commissioner White has your hand up. We still have more, Commissioner White, so I'm not sure if you want to go through.
Yes, Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Okay. I have to leave at about 10 after 3, so I'm just going to have to put all my thoughts on the record now, which will include some thoughts on a couple of the upcoming agenda items. But I've had my briefing with Ms. Zernita, and I know the issues that they're looking for board consensus on.
Yes.
Since this is in my district, I wanted to speak first and share my thoughts on all of these things collectively. And I do hope that all 6 of my colleagues will put on the record today their support or lack thereof for each of the items that I'm about to mention, so that staff can get the closure they deserve and bring us a final package that can be enacted as seamlessly as possible. So just going down the list one by one, I am not in support of any density bonuses in the BALM RP2 areas or the WVR2 areas. I believe this process was started as a way to make certain provisions of the plan better, but not to open things up to increased densities. And I'll remind everyone that these areas are in the outskirts of the county where you would expect densities to progressively decrease as you approach the rural area. I do support an elimination of or reduction in the retail requirement, but to have those replaced with community amenities instead of simply more residential units. I would like to see agri-hood concepts weighted more heavily so as to encourage them. I do support an elimination of the jobs requirement in WVR2. I do not support affordable housing bonuses in WVR2. And again, I'll just point to the fact that these areas are in the outskirts of the county, and areas like this are typically not conducive to affordable housing development. I want to reiterate that green space should, to the greatest extent possible, be planned to support and connect wildlife corridors. I do support safety improvements requirement on substandard roads as a condition for any increased densities. I would like for staff to continue to work with the citizens on policies that will increase contiguous green space acreage. I'd like for staff to continue to work with the citizens to develop architectural standards on community amenity structures and commercial structures. I'd like to see policies that maximize protections for the Little Manatee River to the greatest extent possible. And I would like for staff to continue to look at and consider a sliding scale concept for the BALM area. And that's everything on my list.
Great. Thank you. That was great. I'm glad that you shared that with us all, so we could hear that before you were no longer here. And I see some other hands up. We do have some more presentations, but would you like to speak to this at this time, Commissioner Myers?
Chairman, Yes, one of the things I would like to just point out, and thank you so much for their presentation. But I'd like for for staff to consider having community engagement meetings with the citizens of BOM and Wimauma, other community communications with them regarding this. This is going to come back to the board in the public hearing on the 4th of February, and I'd like that we have some input where we're going to be making changes and voting on the comp plan and the land development code, so we can have some buy-in from the citizens. So I just want to share that as we discuss the various plans that's going to be presented to us today. Thank you.
Ms. Zernita, would you like to respond to that, or have, because I know there's.
I think that that in the 3 weeks between now and the hearing, I certainly think we can try a number of methods to communicate to the stakeholders who participate in the process about the changes, particularly that the BOCC is considering. We've had numerous outreach opportunities over the last 18 months, culminating in an open house in November, but certainly the board's discussions are modifying some of what the community saw in November. So my only caution to what Commissioner Myers mentioned is just that with COVID and the safety precautions, that it might be a virtual meeting that we conduct to just given where we are with that situation.
Thank
you. Conducted virtually, as long as we're able to communicate and hear input from the citizens.
Thank you. And Commissioner Smith, you're recognized.
Thank you. While Commissioner White is still here, Commissioner White, are you here? I wanted to check with him.
Yeah, I'm still here. I had to unmute myself.
Okay.
I'm here.
And you're not appearing in the list because you're by phone. Sorry. Okay. I couldn't agree more with your point about, and most of your points, as a matter of fact, but the no density bonuses in the rural area, outside the urban service area, for any reason is, it seems to me to be borne out by the study we were just presented, as well as the the needs of infrastructure and our citizens' very reasonable expectation that we will be providing infrastructure along with development as it occurs in order to provide that capacity. As I talked about last meeting, water, fire, transportation, schools, all of that. We need to make sure that our development is not overwhelming our capacity. And one of the best tools we have is to maintain this area at a lower density. The question I have for you, and I totally agree too, that it's not appropriate even for affordable housing in any of the areas. I know the BOM community was adamant against it, but in Wimauma, commissioners, keep in mind that we have countywide policies of providing density bonuses in the urban service area for affordable housing, and that applies as well to the town centers, town center of Wimauma in the urban service area. So we do incentivize affordable housing in the urban area, but the proposal to incentivize affordable housing by giving extra density in the rural area is something I would also be opposed to. And I think we have seen a lot of justification for that in this market study. The question I have for Commissioner White before he leaves is, one density bonus that I saw is to do transfer of development rights. And I would hope we're doing transfer of development rights from the total, and I would totally support transferring development rights from the rural area into the urban service area, and from, say, WVR2 into Wimauma Town Center. And those can be stacked on top of affordable housing bonuses there to really incentivize affordable housing in the Wimauma Town Center. Walkable jobs without requiring a car for everybody, like Commissioner Overman said. But what about this concept of transferring development rights from the southern part of RP2 to the northern part of RP2, so that there's no net gain of density, but you do end up with 4 per acre in that northern village part? Just to be clearer about your position, Commissioner White, on that.
May I answer to that, Madam Chair?
Yes, you may.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I support all of the above. Transfer of development rights from the RP2 and WVR2 areas in the rural service area into areas that are in the urban service area. I support TDRs from those areas into the Wimauma downtown area. And I also fully support transfers from RP2 South to RP2 North. So yes, I support all the above.
Okay, one last point is in the concern I have. I mean, I like that it's no net gain in the rural area generally. I like that it, from what I understand, is supported by the citizens of Balm. What concerns me is it's adding density to that northern village, which we are really building up some traffic problems on Rodine Road and the Balm Riverview Road in that very area. And so I wonder if we might postpone that, and maybe it will take as long as it to gear up a TDR program anyway, but hoping that we would get the transportation study, mobility study for those areas done before we did that. Final thoughts on that, Commissioner White, since it's in your district, and I know you work very closely with the Balm community.
Yeah, thank you. I do know that staff has made at least one meaningful enhancement, which is that roundabout where what is it? Balm Wimauma turns into Boyette, I think, or Balm Boyette turns into Boyette. Right there where we used to have that real dangerous triangle, right at the Hawkstone development. But to your point, though, we have a lot more work to do in those areas. I'm optimistic about the Bell Shoals widening project. I do think that will help in that area because, as you know, as you get just past what locals call the antenna farm, and then the road curves to the north, and then you end up hooking in with Bell Shoals, which some improvements are going to be made to. Ditto on Rodine Road. I think we have a lot of work to do there. And then, of course, folks that are, going the other way towards Fishhawk are going to end up on Lithia Pinecrest. And we certainly have our work cut out for us on Lithia Pinecrest. So yeah, I would concur that we have our work to do with respect to any necessary traffic studies, infrastructure studies, to figure out just how to best to address that. I don't know if I've answered your question or responded to your concerns adequately, but yes, I do agree that we have some work to do there, and to the greatest extent possible, I'd like to be out ahead of rezoning requests and requests for additional entitlements, and certainly before we begin to see the TDR program take final shape, I think that work should be done.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure you heard what my concerns were about eliminating the jobs requirement. So that's a little point of that we would have to iron out. But otherwise, thank you very much.
And Madam Chair, can I just say one more thing?
Yes, yes, of course.
Thank you. On the jobs requirement, I know that there's going to be some division on the board, and really, I just humbly request that all 6 of you weigh in. And, staff is in the uncomfortable position of counting heads, and, at the end of the day, they're just going to have to count heads and figure out where the majority of the board is and just move from there. So I've put in my 2 cents worth, but in the end, this is a 7-member board and the majority rules. And I just think it's fair that all 7 of us weigh in and let staff count the heads.
And did you have any further
No,
comments, Commissioner Smith?
For now.
Commissioner Cohen, you're recognized. Commissioner Cohen, you're muted.
Here, I got you. You're unmuted now. Go ahead, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you. Since Commissioner White is about to leave, I just wanted to ask for a little bit of additional clarification. Obviously, Commissioner Myers and I are much newer to this conversation, so he was talking very fast when he went through his list. And I wanted to just, if you could go back to the jobs requirement again and just restate what you said about that. I thanks to Commissioner Smith's questions, I understood where you came out on the density bonuses and also on the affordable housing in the rural service area. Talk to a minute though about the jobs requirement. If you don't.
This is Commissioner White. Was that question directed to me, Commissioner Cohen?
It was.
Okay, and I'm going to have to leave after I answer this question, but yeah, I just simply stated that I'm just in favor of eliminating the jobs requirement, just in that simple of terms. And it's again, it's really going to be up to all 7 of us to just weigh in and let staff count heads and make a determination on what they bring back to us.
Do you support replacing it with some sort of community benefit analysis, or just eliminating it entirely?
No, I'd be open to replacing it with some sort of a community benefit analysis. Absolutely. I don't know what that would look like. I know that we've had some feedback from the consultants, and I'm sure staff has some ideas. But by all means, I'm open to any sort of creative and/or data-driven ideas that we might have as a replacement.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have any other comments?
No, I'm fine for the moment. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just wondering, and Commissioner White made a request that we kind of go through the list, which also has been asked for our comments back on the list that was presented with this and will be presented coming up with I guess we just went through the WVR and we're going to the BOM.
We went through the RP2, and if you would like, since the discussion is kind of merged together on them, Tatiana Gonzalez could present the Wimauma piece, and then you would have both presentations for the discussion, if whatever the board pleases.
I guess we could go on and then maybe just go back. I don't know. Does anybody have any? Let's just move on with the presentation, and then we can maybe go back and give feedback about the different, how people are feeling, especially because the jobs is one of the biggest areas of discussion. So that might be good to have this. We're going to start with the Wimauma presentation.
Yes, I think Tatiana's
Okay.
just sharing her screen now.
Great.
Okay. Good afternoon, commissioners. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, again, good afternoon. Tatiana Gonzalez, Planning Commission staff. I'm here to present the Wimauma Community Plan Update and the Wimauma Village Residential 2 Land Use Study as a consolidated presentation for both plan amendments. As you know, this is a continuation of the last workshop held in December, and the documents linked in your packets are the same drafts of the proposed policies. And during the workshop in December, we heard comments from all of you on the proposed policy recommendations to date. We did identify some core topics from those comments, and we worked with the consultant team and county staff to offer various options to address the comments and hopefully satisfy concerns. And we asked the board to consider the proposed options and provide further feedback to aid staff in refining the policy changes. So the WVR2 land use study is tasked with updating the 2007 community plan, providing new guidance on how development within the WVR2 might occur, and creating a set of supplemental zoning regulations to help guide the form and function of downtown Wimauma. Now this map shows the Wimauma community plan area. The black outline is the Wimauma community plan boundary, and the large dark blue area is the WVR2 future land use category. The WVR2 is outside of the urban service area, and it marks the border between Wimauma's urban service area and the rural services area. Now, the red areas in the center of Wimauma are the main commercial zones along State Route 674, which crosses through Wimauma towards US 301 on the western boundary. Now, compared to the WVR2, there are some higher residential densities in the urban services area portion that allow up to 4 or 6 units to the acre. And there's a small pocket of 9 units to the acre north of the proposed downtown Main Street. And like the RP2, the WVR2 was designed to encourage developers to support Wimauma's town center. As you heard from the consultant on the real estate market analysis, WTLNA, they highlighted some of the needs in the Wimauma community, and we wanted to remind you that some of their recommendations have been incorporated into the WVR2 land use studies proposed policy. And these are the items we heard at our previous workshop, for which we're requesting additional feedback. I'm going to touch on these items quickly and then go into more detail in future slides. The first item is density bonuses in the WVR2, especially regarding the clustering provision. Secondly, affordable housing in WVR2, which is a subset of the density bonuses. There's also infrastructure planning within the Wimauma community plan area, design exceptions and multimodal options, and open space and agricultural land. Other items that were discussed include TDR, the wetland density credit, and the community benefits. We continue to work on these items, but note that they're also being addressed separately from this study. So I won't be presenting policy options on these items today, but I can touch on these items relative to the other topics if the board would like to address them. Before I move on to the main items, I wanted to briefly highlight the proposed community benefits, which were designed to address the Wimauma community plan goals and replace the employment and service requirements. We continue to recommend that requirement, the employment and service requirement, be removed in favor of community benefits. And we feel the proposed community benefits shown here attempt to address some of the topics for discussion that was identified by the board at the last workshop. Although new subdivisions are already required to provide a number of these benefits or these items today, we would like to expand upon that to reflect the specific benefits identified in the Wimauma community plan. First item requiring feedback is density bonuses in the WVR2. Currently, the WVR2 allows developments to increase the permitted density from 1 unit per 5 acres to 2 dwelling units per gross acre, as long as the development is clustered at 3.5 dwelling units per net acre. What is proposed is to maintain the 2 dwelling units per gross acre maximum, but to increase the clustering ratio to 4 dwelling units per net acre to support a more sustainable development pattern. Also proposed is a 20% affordable housing density bonus. If a new development can meet the affordable housing density bonus requirements, including setting aside 20% of the total units for affordable housing, then the density would be allowed to increase to a maximum of 3 dwelling units per gross acre. and would allow the clustering ratio to increase to 8 dwelling units per net acre. One option to address concerns of density increases in the WVR2 would be to only allow that increase as an incentive for affordable housing. Another option would be to keep the maximum density in the WVR2 at 2 dwelling units per gross acre, increasing the clustering ratio, but removing the affordable housing density bonus incentive. Which brings us to the second item for discussion is affordable housing. Currently, each of the existing affordable housing incentive programs in the county are only applicable to developments in Wimauma that are located inside the urban service boundary and in future land use categories of at least 4 or more dwelling units per acre. And both of those requirements therefore eliminate the WVR2 category from consideration. But what is proposed is to allow the affordable housing bonus incentive in the WVR2 only if the development can meet the requirements of the incentive programs and sets aside 20% of the project's total unit count for affordable housing. And in that case, the development would be able to increase the density to a maximum of 3 dwelling units per gross acre. As was mentioned at the previous workshop, the AMI or the average median income in Wimauma is much lower than the county's AMI. An option for your consideration would be to increase the required set-asides for low or very low income levels for developers to be able to qualify for the density bonus in Wimauma. This would require a certain number of units to be set aside for households with 50% AMI or very low income levels, making the program more applicable to the residents of Wimauma. Just as a reminder, there's a separate ongoing study on transfer of development rights in the county, but part of our proposed policies include combining TDR with affordable housing and increasing the transfer ratio to 1 to 2, where 1 dwelling unit from the WVR2 would become 2 units in the downtown receiving zone. And also it would designate the downtown as the receiving zone, one of them. So the Wimauma community clearly wants to have more employment opportunities. It needs the employment opportunities. And one way to achieve that, we feel, is to have more residential density in the commercial core or downtown. And we've heard from the board that, and also from WTL, that TDR is a constructive tool for the area, and we want to affirm that and agree it makes good planning sense to move densities into areas where infrastructure would be more readily available. The third item for discussion is infrastructure planning. Currently, developers are required to cover all the costs associated with a development's infrastructure needs. But what we've heard is that infrastructure is lacking in Wimauma and has fallen behind due to the rapid growth and new development in South County. So what we're proposing is to expand on the existing requirement to include fire, police, schools, including the associated transportation infrastructure for schools. So the developer would be required to cover these costs prior to or concurrent with their development. The fourth item for discussion is design exceptions and multimodal options. Currently, design exceptions are permitted, and what has been proposed are new design overlays for the downtown and the WVR2 in the Land Development Code that would include complete streets guidelines and would require connectivity, multimodal accommodations, and safer street design. This is an example from the proposed code language for the Wimauma downtown that's intended to support pedestrians as much as other modes of transportation. As I mentioned, these design requirements do not exist currently for Wimauma or the WVR2. So options for your consideration include, similar to RP2, strengthening the requirement for developers to bring substandard roads up to safer standards. Second option is increasing the density incentive for developments that provide multimodal community benefits in the WVR2. Here are the key components that were built into the street network policy recommendations, and that's connectivity, open space, and clustering. Now, including the idea of connectivity and networks and maintaining open space requirements and clustering will help accommodate and sustainably develop the future street network in Wimauma to improve access within the community itself. The final item for discussion is open space and agricultural land. Some of this information may overlap with the RP2 study as well. Currently, open space is required to be contiguous and a minimum of 40% of a site's gross acreage. The proposed policies include conservation areas and agricultural land under the open space requirement, and they've been broken down. I've broken down the 40% requirement to specify that 30% must be contiguous and 10% must be internal to the site. The new requirement would encourage the preservation of open space by creating more specific percentage standards and include various options for what constitutes open space, including low-intensity agricultural uses, community gathering spaces, publicly accessible stormwater ponds, and trails. The plan would also have to demonstrate connections to other open space or other conservation areas. And we also have a community benefit option to include dedicating a minimum of 10% of the site for ELAP on top of the minimum open space requirement. So another comment we received was regarding the establishment of a conservation easement to preserve on-site open space, and the option presented here would add that requirement to the proposed language. Currently, the WVR2 category allows agricultural uses to coexist with development. What is proposed is to require new developments to reserve open space, conservation areas, or agricultural land at the edges of the development that are adjacent to rural areas. The option we ask you to consider is to incentivize agricultural activity in residential developments by providing a choice between a standard residential development or an agri-HUD development. And we can incentivize agri-HUD developments through the community benefit requirements by putting more value on this incentive over standard development to help keep agricultural activities as a central facet of Wimauma. I'd like to close with a strategic action plan for Wimauma. The purpose of the strategic plan is that it is a tool for the community to advocate for change. And the items discussed today have touched on these topics you see here. And many of these initiatives are intended to help the community implement their community plan, potentially through public-private partnerships. Although this is not an adopted piece of the plan, these will be strategies enacted and led by the community. And the proposed policies, including the community benefits, are intended to complement these initiatives for the community. This is our proposed schedule moving forward. The first public hearing will take place on February 1st, and the adoption hearing will follow in March, ahead of the moratorium deadline in May. And here's a look again at the items that were presented today and on which we would appreciate the board's feedback. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time, and staff and the consultant are available to answer questions.
Thank you. And we will now go, I'm not sure, I don't see any hands up at this point. Commissioner Smith, you're recognized.
Well, right, since they're asking for feedback on these, I think I've made it clear, density bonus, I'm a no for anything, not for any reason, in the rural area. Infrastructure, if you could go to that slide that is talking about, having heard what we talked about last time about the lack of various kinds of infrastructure in South County, and the importance of making sure that if we increase density, we have water, we have fire, and rescue services, and we have roads infrastructure. Can you show that slide? It was number 14 of your presentation. There we go. Okay. interesting. It says currently all capital costs associated with the provision of infrastructure, like libraries and wastewater and public water, shall be the responsibility of the developer. That's clearly not that has not been happening. Okay, all capital costs not been happening, but the proposal that all capital costs, you know, should be provided for a longer list of infrastructure, that needs to come with some teeth to ensure that actually happens in a way that it hasn't been happening. And it shall be the responsibility of the developer and shall be provided prior to or concurrent with the development. So this cannot be something that we say, oh, they've paid their way out of it. They pay their impact fees. They pay their prop shares. They pay mobility fees, and they're done, because that's only part of providing the services. And there are some situations where we can't provide the services. Water, for example, I showed you all last time, expanding these pipes, even if the developer pays to lay the pipes out to our water system and pays their water impact fees, that until we have enough water being provided by Tampa Bay Water, until we've provided the facilities that boost the water pressure in those pipes, that will simply be lowering the water pressure for everybody in South County. Similarly, with transportation infrastructure, you can pay mobility fees. We can have a developer pay $1 million in mobility fees, but if we're not insisting that they also provide the right of way, like we saw in a land use issue just last week, if they don't also provide the right of way to provide a complete streets, bicycles and sidewalks, if they're just paying and then their rezoning doesn't provide that, we're not going to be able to do anything with that money to widen the road, to provide bike lanes and sidewalks if the right of way isn't there. And in these substandard rural roads, they're very narrow. They end in ditches on either side. So we need to ensure that the developer not only pays, but that it's possible to provide the infrastructure. Same with fire and police. They can pay their impact fees, but we need to ensure that there's a place to put a fire station and that the fire station is built. I think that's what this is kind of beginning to get at with that last underlined sentence, but it needs to be very clear. So along those lines, absolutely no design exceptions. These rural roads cannot accommodate the kind of suburban development that is even 2 per acre. And in this area where in Wimauma, for example, a third of the population is a poverty level, bicycles are a means of transportation. And the roads need to be safe for them. And children walk to school, and the roads need to be safe for them as well. The green space, can you show that slide just a moment? It's toward the end about the talking about instead of the current currently 40% of the gross site acreage, it could be 30% contiguous and 10% internal to the site. Let me ask you about that 10% internal to the site, because I've seen rules like this get fulfilled by developers saying, counting up every little strip of green space between the sidewalk and the road, and it adds up to however many acres, and there's your green space. Are there more details to this than that?
Yes, there are more details than that. There's we've actually included a long section for the Land Development Code regarding open space, which we've expanded on. The 10% internal to the site was something that we considered in regards to having for neighborhoods, for actual developments, to have as a community gathering area, for instance. But yes, but we do have more teeth, as it were, for the proposal for the land development code.
Great, I'll be looking for that. And then the last thing I'll say is regarding affordable housing. And I talked about this at the last workshop. Apparently it needs some more feedback today. That affordable, it's really important that the reason we're putting affordable housing here is because the citizens of Wimauma want the dream of affordable housing. And we do not want to promise them something that they are not going to get at the end of the day here. So we do not want to promise them some type of affordable housing that and that they cannot afford, that 30% below the poverty level, and that only serves to lure people from other areas here, and they wake up and they weren't able to afford to move in. And to that end, I'd want to see get some understanding, and we can do this later one-on-one, but I'd want to see, you know, how many citizens of Wimauma we are really trying to accommodate with affordable housing, and make sure we're not just bringing more people looking for affordable housing that the Wimauma residents can't afford. And you know, with also making sure that there's a mix, because as we all know, that's what benefits everybody. The low, middle, and high income is if there's a mix, but ensuring that this satisfies the actual citizens of Wimauma in their actual income levels. Thank you. So that's my feedback.
I'm sorry. I don't see any other hands up at this point. Is there any other commissioners that would like to speak to some of this? Commissioner Overman, you're recognized.
Thank you. I had to get all my screens where I needed to be able to see them. Sorry about that. I echo many of the comments that actually Commissioner Smith and Commissioner White both made. It makes sense to respect the community which is developing its community plan. You know, it makes sense to make sure that we're building, if we're approving projects, that we're building it for the people who not only live there, but the people who want to live there and in the community that Wimauma wants to be. And I think that one of the slides that caught my attention was the transfer of development rights from WVR2 into the downtown area is not my idea of an effective TDR. That it needs to be from truly rural areas into the downtown area rather than a suburban area that is, maybe keeping the existing allowable, but transferring what it's been zoned for. Because I've said since the day I got here is that, one house or two houses per acre is not my idea of rural. And so, that's not rural in my opinion. And so, I mean, it may be suburban, but it's, in my opinion, is not rural. And so the TDR equation has got to make sense. And it's got to be a fair trade. There, we have to clearly identify receiving zones versus sending zones. And I'm not sure areas inside of the two areas that we spoke about today, other than transferring out of BOM up to the village that we heard in the earlier presentation. That might make sense because that's where a majority of the community plan is looking to receive that. But I'm not sure outside of the downtown area or within a reasonable boundary of the downtown area, it makes sense to create additional density beyond what it's already allowed to do. And there have been lots of conversation about trade-offs for those density bonuses, and one of them is transportation and transit availability as a bonus item. And so the last slide where it talked about it had to be concurrent is an important comment, because we currently don't have a transit plan for that area at all. As Commissioner Smith mentioned, the road network there doesn't even allow for using walking and cycling, other than maybe in the downtown area, and that's only because it's substandard roads and people drive a little smaller. But those are not roads that are designed for safety in that, even in the downtown area. So I think it's critically important that if we offer any kind of density bonus or for affordable housing, that be embedded in the actual plan, that be embedded in the PD that usually ends up coming, that it has to be, you have to meet all the standards, and be part of the transportation and the transit solution. Recognizing that we don't have currently a transit plan for that particular area that really needs it because of the lack of cars in the area. So if maybe the developers can help us make that happen, that would be really great. But I do think, the revitalization of the downtown area needs to be reflective, or that plan needs to be reflective of the community around it. I like the idea of the agro hoods. I actually wasn't really familiar with that, but I am a big proponent of community gardens and communities that allow for gardening. And in an area that has historically been very agricultural, it makes sense. That's probably an easy shift. But if our code, if our plan design, if our building code and zoning code don't allow for it by the time you get there, we're not going to get there. And I think that's what's critically important about this. Not only the comprehensive plan, but writing the concurrent code so that the requirements are there. For those of you, actually not almost all of us, but for those of you that weren't at the MPO meeting this morning, I asked the question when we were listening to a Vision Zero presentation, if the standards that are being recommended for the roads that we are addressing, the fact that they're historically deadly roads, and which many of the roads in this area are basically either highways or small substandard roads, many of those recommendations need to be adopted in the road structure in this area. And so they need to be written into our transportation plan so that there's no loophole for a developer that has access to any of these county roads or city roads, county roads or even FDOT roads, that the standards for Vision Zero are actually maintained within the plan. So I know that's in the works, but it needs to be written into that it's required to meet those guidelines. I like seeing that the AMI number, if affordable housing is put in there, is lowered to accommodate the community of which Wimauma is, to make sure that any effort to provide affordable housing actually is attainable by the people who live there. And since the average median income is significantly lower in that area than the rest of the county, that may need to be part of the criteria for doing affordable housing in order to make sure that we are, in fact, building housing for the people that live there and reducing the impact of displacement that has really ravaged that whole area. And I do, to the consultants that did the economic and market study, there's a ton of trailer properties that families live in that area where the occupancy rate is ridiculous. So those averages that we saw earlier are probably low if you really look at what's really happening in that area. So the need is great, but the trade-off has got to be a real trade-off. And that was what I was mentioning earlier, that if jobs become at all part of the equation, it needs to be a true economic benefit that encompasses all the services that a community needs. including fire and and police and roads and but also the jobs and that many people in the service industry can transition and become upward mobile. The services that families need, because this is a family community and we need to respect it as such. And I'll stop there.
Weigh in a little here on this discussion.
Commissioner, sit there for a second. Repeat yourself.
Yes. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, you're muted for the first couple seconds. If you could repeat yourself.
Oh, okay, thank you. At this point, I'd like to weigh in on this discussion. I said, and take an opportunity to share my thoughts about some of this. And I appreciate hearing from others. So I'd like to just respond in, and I'll be asking to see a few of the slides again that Commissioner Smith put up, because I have some comments to say about them. Clearly, I want to end our wetland density bonuses. They haven't made any sense. I'm totally opposed to any affordable housing bonus in the rural area of any of this. And just to be clear, all of the RP2 is in the rural area, all BOM. In Wimauma, WVR, most of it is in the rural area, but a small part, that downtown part, is in the urban service area. That urban service area, that downtown, is already covered by the affordable housing plan in Hillsborough County that we already have in the urban service area. And so that makes sense to me to stay there. I've said before, it is, to me, it's an oxymoron. Affordable housing in the rural service area doesn't make any sense at all. To not be able to have transit, and we will never, in these lightly populated areas, we cannot get any kind of decent transit, sometimes to even downtown Tampa, our most dense areas, East Tampa, Town and Country, Progress Village, Brandon, all these other areas. And even with the sales tax, should we get it, it will not be able to cover any kind of reasonable transit service to these outlying areas. That's costing a family $10,000 a year. So I think we should just be for a single car, each car. And I just think it's inherently unaffordable in the rural area. So we should not be promoting that. However, I would love to promote affordable housing in the downtown Wimauma area. And to that point, I think it makes total sense for you to transfer development rights from the rural area into the downtown Wimauma area, which is in the urban service area, and which would be lovely to be, I think, even more densely, I imagine it to be a much more dense area, like a wonderful downtown with maybe, instead of the only housing that these developers out in this area seem to be able to do is single family housing. I could imagine duplexes, townhouses, maybe small apartments, maybe things with, businesses on the first floor and others. Maybe that's a dream, but some places seem to have accomplished that. So I say you take the rural area, and that's where you can transfer the rights from into the downtown Wimauma urban service area. That is what makes total sense to me and seems like it would be appropriate. I'd like to go also to that slide that says infrastructure plan, if you could. Okay. I just want to be clear, because we have two new commissioners. This is totally misrepresenting, and I find it disturbing what currently we do. in the rural service area or in unincorporated Hillsborough County, by the way, none of these developers, zero, even though there's a special provision within RP2 and Wimauma that they have to pay for public water and wastewater. That has zero been done. And it is unique to Hillsborough County that we have not done this. We have paid, they discontinued an impact fee, which we've now restored just in the last few months for capacity, the AGRF. We lost since 2014 about $100 million for capacity for water and wastewater because we weren't charging $2,000 flat fee. They do that in Tampa. They do it in Temple Terrace, Plant City, and all over many places in the state of Florida. But we haven't been doing that. So they have not been paying that as well. Shockingly, they've not been paying the cost of water and wastewater. We did not have any studies to bring that up. We were going for an average of 4,000 a house. We just raised it to 8,000 a house, but the developers weren't paying for this like they do everywhere else from what I can understand in the nation, city of Tampa, every county. They instead have put the cost of water and wastewater as a lien on the houses to be paid off over 20 years at what has turned out to be 13% interest. So I think it's false news that water and wastewater has ever been paid by developers to this point, and we should not have that information up there because it's misleading. Parks, we didn't raise those impact fees since they were originally set in 1985. We're still not raising them now to what they should be. I can tell you that we had different places at different fees set, by the way, by the 1980 census until it was just changed. And they were paying something like $300 or $400 a home. And in Manatee and in Pasco and Polk, they were paying more, like $3,000 a home. So we have had 35 years of having the barest of resources for parks and hasn't paid. And that might be why we haven't been able to do what we needed to do because we haven't had capital for parks at all, and the impact fees have not been paid. Libraries are covered in other places by impact fees. Zero. We don't even have an impact fee for libraries, so that hasn't existed. So I don't even know where this list comes. And then the et cetera might include the very important mobility fees, which again haven't been paid to any extent, particularly in the rural area where they were like $1,000 a house until they were finally raised in 2016, but then reduced incredibly. And the fact is right now they're still at 80%, even though it's red hot housing market, and we are 30 years behind on any kind of infrastructure. So I don't want the newer commissioners, as well as there hasn't been a fire, by the way, for 35 years. We collected $250,000 a year, and we finally just raised it, and we're now getting $2.5 million. That doesn't really cover the need, but certainly the county is going to be paying the way for the back need. And schools, by the way, when we raised them for the first time, finally in 2006, we raised it, I'm not kidding, from an average house, $196, and this is throughout the county, including the city of Tampa. And they were paying $4,000 in Manatee, Pasco, $4,000 and $5,000. Finally, we didn't raise it again until this board did it just 6 months ago or something. And so it's now up to $8,200, which is more reasonable. But we didn't have schools built because they didn't have the money to build them. And that's based on a current study, and we put that in place. But, we've gone for years and years and years with no infrastructure. So I just the currently is not what has been done. The proposed, again, would require us to pass and be committed to passing 100% infrastructure fees. We'd have to do a new fee for libraries that hasn't been done. And also, by the way, other counties do have, besides fire, they do have law enforcement and sometimes public buildings as impact fees. And we do not have any of those. So we don't have any kind of law enforcement for building new sheriff stations or anything like that. We don't have a library fee. And we don't have a public buildings fee as most other places do. Our park fee is still incredibly low and I'm not even sure of the state of it, but it's going in at a half pace, I think, in the next few months. And again, our mobility fees are, not only did the study really lowball everything, but we haven't even used 100% of what they lowballed, even though we have a pace of development that's really stunning. So, I can't, I don't have really faith, and especially when they were required in these areas to do water, wastewater, there was no provision that made them do that. So I don't, I'm having trouble thinking that that is any part of a community benefit, since since what they've even been required to do has never been done in any reasonable way. And so I don't even look at that as being a benefit. I'll have to say that. I don't see that as being where we just need to do that through policy, and we need to do it right as soon as possible, in my mind, to even get it up to speed right now. The other is if we could go to the open space slide. So, we did pass a policy at the board just in the last year that said that that we put conservation easements over this open space created to protect it. Because, I had developers come in my office and say to me, we're just putting 2 for an acre now, or they were doing this or that so that they could fill it in later, arrange it in a way that, at some point they would push for that. I looked at other comprehensive plans around the state, and it seemed like all of them had conservation easements, which we haven't had and should have been probably a regular practice. We also have a policy of that now, but it's not really been widely used and should be, and we probably need to make it part of our land development code for every place when we have this requirement. As far as the internal to the site, here's some things. First of all, there's places where they get wetland density credits, or I think even take credit for wetlands for places that they've dug out or used as drainage. But sometimes it doesn't have general community access to it. It has a little lake with only a certain number of houses around it. And so the lake is considered open space, and the only access is to the houses around it. So I don't know about wetlands or, water, if this has to be usable open space. And it would seem to me it would have to be community accessible open space together. And so I'm just not sure. I think we need to have that discussion. And I also think that we need to have, like what's happening with golf courses now that are coming back to us. There's, people thought that they would always be there. They're not. So they're talking about now what they put in there, and, and maybe apartment buildings or who knows what. But I think there has to be a permanent easement or something over this to, say that it will be there for the future, because we find also too many people that are now disturbed by, the development that they bought into, and it doesn't have as promised. And I don't know if there were, as far as the jobs requirement, please, the WTL study and what has been said to us today, I think it's really important that we keep that jobs requirement in place as they recommended, but with some fine tuning of that. And I think that that would be a really important way to look at the timing of things, to start to try to focus on developing that downtown first, which makes all the sense in the world to do that. We have many, many opportunities in the urban service area for densifying, for infill. I know it isn't what the developers that want this are interested in doing, but that is the shift we have to make, because we are so far behind on any kind of reasonable infrastructure, even in the urban service area. And our sales tax just won't cover are, if we get it, won't even in any way cover our, well, will in some way, and I'm glad to get it, and we desperately need it. But you know, we need to really look at how we are doing our how we're going to make up for all the lost infrastructure, much less the new stuff. And the other thing is no design exceptions, period. I mean, I think all those need to come to the board, and we just shouldn't be entertaining them. They just shouldn't even be on the there shouldn't be an opportunity to do that, because we've lost so much over the years again in not having infrastructure. So I don't know if I addressed all the areas that others had addressed and answered the questions, but I just wanted to reflect back on my thoughts about all this. And I guess I'll recognize Commissioner Cohen at this point. I'm sorry.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So as has been pointed out, I think by me and also by others, I'm fairly new to this discussion. And one caveat before we start is that I've never had the benefit of any public input at a meeting on these topics. So in fairness, I'm obviously very interested to hear what people in the community have to say when we end up holding public hearings. It's a little more difficult at this stage of the game to make firm commitments about what to support and be against. But I'm going to go ahead and try to go through the list and at least talk to the things that I feel that I'm able to talk to right now. I, for the life of me, don't understand why we would consider giving density bonuses in the rural service area. That would be the first general statement that I would make. I want to reiterate something Commissioner Smith said earlier. You know, even if we assume that going forward, all development is going to pay for the infrastructure costs associated with it, it's too late for that on the water issue. On the water issue, we can build all the pipes we want and all the delivery systems we want, but as we have seen at Tampa Bay Water, there is a significant supply issue that is facing South County, and we are going to have to integrate that into what is approved going forward, and we're going to have to take into account what's already been approved. There are different projections that are being used as Tampa Bay Water is trying to figure out how much supply is going to be available between now and 2028. But no matter what set of statistics you're looking at, there is a water availability crisis. And it's beyond the point of just infrastructure to solve it. It's going to require the type of community investment across multiple counties that's going to take almost a decade to get us to where we need to be. So that is out there. On the affordable housing question, you know, what concerns me about creating affordable housing in these areas is, and particularly in Wimauma, is that if you have such a low per capita income, you're going to be building affordable housing that is going to be accessible at a price point where it's going to attract people from all over the place. And if it attracts people from all over the place to the rural area and there's no jobs to go along with it, we're getting exactly back to what we've been talking about, which is people commuting on substandard infrastructure and not having any access to transit at all. And I'm extremely concerned about the lack of affordable housing in the community, but I agree with what was said earlier that it really needs to be cited in places where people have access to employment and to transit, where they don't have to waste all of their money on a car and really expensive and congestion inducing ways of getting around. I also certainly support the idea of getting rid of design exceptions, particularly those that take us away from Vision Zero principles related to our streets. We saw at the MPO this morning how we have all of these terrible pedestrian and bicycle corridors where people are killed as a matter of course. And I thought that what we did yesterday at the BOCC meeting was great, because we took something and made it better by forcing it, Commissioner Smith, to have complete streets and to build out what is not going to be terribly expensive infrastructure for that size of a project. I also agree with Commissioner Kemp about ending the wetland density bonus. I voted in favor of moving that forward because I thought that made a lot of sense. On the other hand, I'm very uncomfortable with the whole jobs requirement tied to development issue. I think that it's, I just, from what I've seen of it, it seems to me unworkable. There's a lot of speculation involved in what jobs are actually going to exist at any given time. And I absolutely understand why the community thought that was a very good way of trying to prevent becoming just a suburban outpost of people working in Tampa and in the city. I just don't know if that objective can reasonably be accomplished with that type of a tie-in. And I think that what I'm looking for in the next month or so is to talk about what other types of community benefits we might be able to require in order to have things go forward. I'm particularly interested to hear some of the public input on that point, because I know that there's a lot of difference of opinion about it out there. And I feel like, perhaps I'll get a lot more of an education on that if I put it out there and say to people, I'm interested in hearing both sides. But from what I've seen, I see that is somewhat, to me, that's just somewhat unworkable. So those are just my initial comments based on what I've heard today. And I hope that helps give the board, give the Planning Commission and the staff some guidance. I do just want to say one last thing before I'm finished, and that is that to the point that was made earlier, and I believe Commissioner Overman made it, but I'm not entirely sure. It may have been made by multiple commissioners. I do think that if there's going to be any kind of a jobs requirement, we've got to broaden what it covers, because downtowns, the way that we have known them, even though we all want to see hubs of retail activity, downtowns, the way we have known them, are struggling. They're struggling even worse in the COVID environment. And they're particularly struggling worse because we've become a society that orders things by mail and that gets products through large distribution centers. We're also a state that doesn't tax internet sales. So we put this burden on our retailers that makes it all artificially difficult for them to compete the minute that they open. So I think that broadening the definition of what might be covered might really help us get to the type of town center that we're looking for. I think the idea that you're going to have a place with quaint little shops, it's a wonderful goal, but we can't even achieve it in downtown Tampa right now. And I don't want to promise something to people that is ultimately unattainable. Daycare centers are great, restaurants, small community-based businesses that serve the neighborhood, certainly, but I don't believe those are going to create the types of job numbers that we're necessarily looking for in that tie-in. So those are just a few initial comments based on my being at 2 workshops and trying to absorb a lot of this information. And I'm looking forward to talking about it further.
And thank you. And we will wrap up in a few minutes here, but I just want to make sure before I recognize you, Commissioner Overman, if there's anyone else, and you've already spoken, that's out there that wants to speak. Okay. Then I'm thinking that you're recognized, Commissioner Overman.
Thank you. And I forgot to ask a quick question earlier. So, and all the comments I've heard are right in line with kind of what I've been thinking, is that as we heard from the consultants earlier, the nexus between housing development and the downtown equation is almost impossible to try and solve, but not impossible if we look at other tools to help us get there. But I did need to ask a question. you know, we've been talking about the comp plan, and we're talking about how we grow, and then we've been talking a little bit about a community benefits agreement or community benefits document. What is the nexus between those two things? Because, you know, we have community plans, we have a community benefit PASA plan, and then we have a comp plan. And then we have, of course, all the zoning specs and land use specs that we've got to make all mash up and work. But I don't know what the prioritization is, which has teeth, which doesn't, which comes first, which doesn't, because again, we're getting into a situation where we have a lot of people that are looking for expectations of great things because we've been having these conversations. And if it takes another 30 years for them to, you know, to appear, that needs to be, you know, addressed. But even with that, which comes first and how do they work together? Because I think even with what the community that lives there, the businesses that live there, the families that have grown up there, their expectations are going to be important. But we also have developers that are trying to figure out how to stay in business in this area that see an opportunity and want to do business here. And so we need to make sure everybody understands how that framework and prioritization is going to work when we go through the process of developing. And I'll stop there.
So that's a great question. I will attempt to answer it, and if any of the consultants feel that I've gone off track, they can correct me. But this concept of community benefits is basically that there is, in order to achieve the 2-unit per acre density, they are going to have to select some of these community benefits. And the community benefits are weighted differently based on what they are and how easy they are perhaps to achieve them, so that they have to come up with a combination of multiple of them, but again, based on the size of their property and what choice they make to arrive at the 2-unit per acre density. So in the example of Wimauma, there is a list of 10 choices at the moment. And they will have to, depending on the size of the property, do 2 of them, do 3 of them, do 4 of them, in order to arrive at the 2-unit per acre density. And in addition to that, what a developer comes forward with, it will have to be agreeable to the county or whomever is the beneficiary of that community benefit. So if it is that they have chosen that they're going to, for example, use the land dedication dedicating the connecting infrastructure for a school, then the school district will have to say, yes, we agree that we need that community benefit and that they are providing what is adequate for us to satisfy that. So basically, they will have to do some level of the community benefits to achieve the 2-unit per acre density. You know, some of the options that we've shared with you, particularly in the RP2 North area, would have, if they did more community benefits, they could have gotten up to 3. I think we're hearing, you know, from most of you that you want to keep the density at 2 units per acre. So we're I think I'm very clear on that. We would not be pursuing that, but that's how the community benefits would be utilized in this case. So they would become regulatory as part of their plan development zoning.
Thank you. I just, I'm ready to get out. I don't know about others, but I have an appointment coming up. But just one more thing. Why we still have the WTL, and I just wanted to me, when I read your information, it sounds like that, or your study, it sounds like you have optimism that we could have a small downtown Wimauma. That's a vision that's been out there a long time. That's a vision that was articulated when this settlement agreement was reached that created these 2 areas with the Florida Department of Community Affairs. I don't know if you know that history, you probably do. But it sounded like you were optimistic that we could create or work tools that could possibly in some combinations of things, bring something like that about. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think it's going to require a combination of public incentives and policies. I think from an economic perspective, what we would seek to, a goal that would be important would be to understand what we call the leverage ratio. For every X dollars of public investment, that is in turn spinning off Y dollars of private investment. And that ought to be an important consideration moving forward.
That's what I hear from Wimauma, but I also, and they used to be one of the only few incorporated places in Hillsborough County way back. But there seems to be a great desire for something like that. And I see other places as well in the county where those would be wonderful assets. And actually thinking about that, just one more thing is both Ruskin, which isn't part of this, and Wimauma have low pressure sewer systems, which as long as we remain, chained by that lack of infrastructure that is so basic, and we are finally have as a county commission decided that we would move forward on that, but it's costly, and that hinders any density developments in the traditional areas that have been serviced by low pressure sewer systems. So I'll just actually throw that in as part of the conversation. But I think with that, I don't know, I don't want to, Commissioner Myers, I see your hand is up. I know I was looking for a while. Did you?
Yes, thank you so much, Madam Chairman. I do have concerns on affordable housing and the eliminating the jobs. But I also want to ask the question regarding the 2005 County Economic Development Study. Are we going to look at bringing an updated study back?
Would someone like to answer that now? I think that's an excellent point. I would love to see that and have been asking for that. So do we need to bring that up at the county commission, or how is that going to, or is that something that's part of what you're looking at, Ms. Zernita?
It is not something that is a part of what we're looking at.
Okay.
I would defer to the county administration on how best to proceed in that regard.
Great. Okay. So I think that's a great, I think we really really need to do that. In fact, I've asked about that for a few years and we didn't get it in the past, but hopefully it's a new day here. So I think we can probably express that at a meeting and get that done. And perhaps Commissioner Myers, that might be something that you'd like to bring forward.
I plan to. Thank you.
Great, excellent, thanks. Okay, so it looks like it's, did you have any more comments, Commissioner Myers?
Thank you so much.
I didn't, sorry. Because I know for both you and Commissioner Cohen, this is a huge bite of the elephant, to go forward. But I guess with that, I don't see any other comments. I don't know if there's anything else to be said here. And if I don't hear anything else, we can adjourn. Great. Thank you all so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Stay safe.